the mountains of Appalachia, stories bleed into the soil like the roots of ancient trees, twisting, tangling, and refusing to die. Among them is one tale so grotesque that it has survived in hushed whispers passed from one generation to the next, the story of the Parker Line. To this day, locals will tell you that if you wander too deep into Parker Hollow, you won't come back the same. Some say you won't come back at all. But the more disturbing question isn't what the Parkers did while they were alive, it's whether they ever truly died. The Parkers began as settlers, carving their lives into the hard bark of the Appalachian frontier. Poverty was their inheritance, isolation their cage. Unlike other families who eventually scattered, the Parkers stayed hidden within the hollow. With little contact from the outside world, they turned inward. Generations intermarried, their bloodline curdling into something unrecognizable. By the late 1800s, when others in the region spoke of progress, the Parkers were whispered about in tones of revulsion, as if they were less than human. Travelers passing through the hills would occasionally stumble upon Parker Hollow. Some returned, shaking, speaking of faces that looked melted, jaws that seemed crooked, eyes too close together. They spoke of a sickly stench, like meat left out too long, seeping from their cabins. Others, however, never returned. A handful of missing persons reports still rest in county archives, each with the same chilling detail. The last place they were seen was near Parkerland. One account, buried deep in old sheriff's logs from the 1920s, describes a hunter who ventured into the hollow, searching for game. He was found 2 days later, delirious, clothes torn, rambling about people with teeth like animals who hissed at him from the tree line. The man swore he heard voices calling his name in the night, though no one from his party had been near him. He never set foot in those woods again. The Parkers lived off the land, but not in the way their neighbors did. Locals whispered of slaughtered livestock found mutilated, bones stripped clean in ways no animal could manage. Chickens would vanish, goats gutted, and sometimes the forest fell silent after dark, as though even the wolves refused to hunt where the Parkers roamed. The most grotesque rumors claimed they turned to cannibalism, not just of outsiders, but of their own blood, when famine or madness took hold. By the 1940s, children in nearby towns were dared to venture near Parker Hollow. Some came back laughing, claiming they saw smoke rising from chimneys in long-abandoned cabins. Others said they heard heavy footsteps following them, though no one was there. One boy never came home. His body was found weeks later in a creek bed, gnawed down to bone. The sheriff's report blamed wild animals, but his parents always insisted otherwise. Stranger still were the markings carved into trees along the hollow's edge. Jagged symbols, crudely etched with knives, spirals crossing over circles, resembling both human and animal figures. Old-timers said they were warning signs that outsiders were not welcome. But some researchers who stumbled on photographs of those carvings claimed they looked ritualistic, as though the Parkers had built their own twisted religion from isolation and madness. A folklorist who traveled the region in the 1960s tried to study the family. She hiked into the hollow, notebook in hand, determined to prove that the Parkers were just victims of gossip. She was never seen again. Weeks later, her notebook was mailed anonymously to her university. The pages stopped abruptly mid-sentence. "They are watching me." Their faces, the last word was smeared, the ink running as if it had been written in haste or fear. Still, there are those who swear the Parkers did not vanish. A road crew in the 1980s reported strange activity while cutting a new path near the hollow. At night, their equipment was tampered with, fuel lines slashed, and eerie sounds echoed through the hills. One worker claimed he saw pale shapes crouched at the tree line, staring, not moving, just waiting. The crew abandoned the project, and the road was never finished. Ask around in nearby towns today, and you'll still hear fragments of the Parker legend. Some insist the family line ended long ago, consumed by their own depravity. Others whisper that descendants still lurk in the hollow, their blood so warped by inbreeding and secrecy that they are no longer quite human. Truckers passing through the region sometimes report seeing figures on back roads at night, gaunt, misshapen, watching from the shoulder of the highway. But here's what unsettles even seasoned locals. The Parker Hollow itself seems alive with unease. Phones lose service, compasses spin, and the forest grows unnaturally quiet. Those who camp too close speak of hearing scratching along their tents, low guttural laughter in the distance, and the sound of something moving on all fours just beyond the firelight. And every so often, a hiker disappears, leaving behind only shredded gear or boot prints that stop abruptly, as though swallowed by the earth. What truly happened in Parker Hollow? Was this family destroyed by their own grotesque choices, or did they unlock something far older in the dark heart of Appalachia? And if you were to step into those woods tonight, would you find only silence, or something still waiting, watching, and hungry? Asterisk, those who dared to investigate Parker Hollow often came back changed. Their stories fractured and trembling, as if words alone could not capture what they had seen. What's chilling is that their accounts separated by decades. Even generations carry the same details, the same echoes of horror that cannot be easily dismissed as coincidence. One of the most disturbing stories comes from a deputy who, in 1957, was called to search for a missing couple. They had last been seen heading into the Appalachian backroads near Parker territory. The deputy's report, written in a shaky hand, describes finding the couple's car abandoned at the edge of the hollow. The doors were open, the headlights still faintly glowing, and strange claw-like marks scored across the hood, as though something had raked metal with unnatural strength. He and his search party followed tracks into the woods, barefoot prints pressed into the mud, some smaller, some so large they couldn't possibly belong to children. The trail ended near a collapsed cabin, its doorway dark and yawning. The deputy never finished his report. He resigned within a week and moved 3 counties over, in oral histories. Older townsfolk sometimes mention an unspoken agreement with the Parkers: leave them alone, and they will leave you alone. But this supposed pact did not protect everyone. Hunters who strayed too close described hearing women singing deep in the trees low, mournful lullabies, in voices that didn't sound fully human. One hunter swore he saw a figure crouched by a creek bed, gnawing at a deer carcass. When it lifted its head, its mouth seemed to stretch too wide, teeth jagged, face sunken and pale. The hunter fired his rifle, but the figure slipped into the shadows without a sound, leaving only blood-slick stones and the lingering stink of decay. In the 1970s, a group of university students, fascinated by the legend, decided to spend the night in Parker Hollow as part of an amateur documentary project. They carried tape recorders, flashlights, and bravado. Only one survived. His name was Michael, and he never spoke publicly about what happened that night. But years later, one of his tapes surfaced in a pawn shop, a cracked cassette labeled simply "Hollow." On it, you can hear the students laughing, mocking the local legends till the laughter stops. The sound of branches snapping, frantic breathing, and then a woman's scream fills the tape. A voice whispers, faint but unmistakable, "You shouldn't have come here." The tape ends with a sickening wet noise, and then silence. Some historians argue that the grotesque deformities attributed to the Parkers could be explained by generations of inbreeding, malnutrition, and isolation. But locals insist there was something more at work, something that medicine or science could not touch. The Parkers were not merely deformed, they were changed. Their features twisted in ways that seemed purposeful, almost ritualistic, as if their very bodies bore the mark of something they had invited into their bloodline. It's said that deep in the hollow, there once stood a Parker meeting house, a crude structure of logs and stone, long since swallowed by the forest. Those who have claimed to see it describe walls smeared with symbols, animal bones hanging from twine, and pits in the floor where fires once burned. More disturbing still were the crude altars littered with fragments of human bone. Whether these were remnants of ritual sacrifice or cannibalistic feasts is unknown. But one thing is certain, the Parkers were not worshipping anything that belonged to the Christian God. By the late 20th century, authorities tried to seal off Parker Hollow. The county declared the land unsafe, citing unstable ground and hazardous structures. But the locals knew the truth. They wanted to wall off whatever still lingered in those woods. And yet, the reports never stopped. Campers claimed they heard dragging footsteps circling their tents. Motorists described pale figures darting across the road on all fours. And in 1994, a pair of hikers vanished without a trace. Their last photographs, later developed from a found camera, showed them standing at the edge of the hollow. In the background between the trees, a figure can be seen. Too tall, too thin, its head cocked unnaturally to the side, watching them. Even today, Parker Hollow draws the curious, the thrill-seekers, the skeptics. Most come back with only stories of eerie silence and an unsettling heaviness in the air. But a few return visibly shaken, swearing they saw glowing eyes watching them from the underbrush, or heard the sound of chewing and crunching bones in the distance. And sometimes, they bring back proof. Animal remains torn apart with frightening precision. Photographs blurred with shapes that don't belong. Or recordings where voices whisper names in the dark. What makes the Parker legend so grotesque isn't only what they may have done, it's the possibility that they chose it. That in their hunger, their desperation, they made a pact with something older, something primal. But they embraced the horror instead of fleeing it, binding themselves and their children to a curse that no grave could contain. And so the question remains, are the Parkers truly gone, or have they simply learned to hide better in the endless dark of the Appalachian woods? Some believe the bloodline never ended, that it still festers in the hollow, producing children with faces that must never see daylight. Others go further, claiming the Parkers are no longer fully human at all, but something else entirely. There are whispers that if you follow the old path deep into the hollow, past the rotting cabins and the symbols carved into trees, you will eventually find the meeting house. And inside, if you listen carefully, you will hear the faint sound of chewing, as though a feast is still underway, waiting for the next uninvited guest to stumble in. For years, Parker Hollow has been dismissed by outsiders as nothing more than rural folklore, the kind of exaggerated campfire tale designed to scare children into behaving. But anyone who has stood at the edge of that cursed land knows the weight that settles in your chest. The suffocating silence, the way even the air seems to resist your breath. And if the stories were only rumors, why do they keep repeating and change through generations, across decades, spoken by people who never met, yet describe the same horrors? One of the darkest pieces of evidence comes from a journalist in the early 2000s who set out to debunk the Parker legend. She carried a camcorder and recorded everything, determined to prove that the hollow was nothing more than a decaying patch of forest. Her footage was never broadcast, but fragments leaked online years later. In the grainy clips, she walks through skeletal cabins, her voice steady at first, then trembling as she describes an overpowering odor of rot. She finds what appears to be a fire pit, littered with bones. She tries to laugh it off until she notices some of the bones are human. The footage ends with her flashlight swinging wildly, catching a pale, hunched figure at the tree line. Its eyes reflect the beam for a split second, before rushing toward her. The camera drops. The recording cuts to black. The journalist was never found. But perhaps the most grotesque truth lies not only in what the Parkers did, but in what they became. Local lore insists they were never entirely human again after sealing themselves away in that hollow. Isolation warped them. Hunger drove them to unspeakable acts. And somewhere along the way, They crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Some whisper that they turned to cannibalism so often that it rewired their instincts, twisting them into predators that look at humans, not as neighbors, but as prey. Others believe they worshipped something older than Christianity, some entity lurking beneath the Appalachian soil that demanded offerings of flesh and blood in exchange for survival. The symbols carved into trees, the ritual pits in the meeting house, the whispers of chanting all point to the idea that the Parkers were not merely victims of circumstance. They chose to embrace darkness, to feed it, to let it breed within their bloodline. And with each generation, the children grew less human, more grotesque, until the line itself became infamous. A warning told in whispers, do not cross into Parker Hollow, unless you want to vanish into its hunger. In recent years, there have been reports that are difficult to dismiss. A pair of spelunkers exploring caves near the hollow found evidence of tunnels stretching deep beneath the earth. In one chamber, they discovered crude drawings burned into stone figures, with elongated limbs, jaws stretched impossibly wide, devouring human forms. The spelunkers claimed they heard sounds in the darkness, something moving, breathing heavily. Far below, they fled, abandoning their gear. When they returned weeks later with others, the chamber had collapsed, as if swallowed by the mountain itself. Then there are the stories of truckers who take back roads through Appalachia at night. They speak of figures running alongside their vehicles on all fours, keeping pace with terrifying speed, before vanishing into the woods. One trucker described a woman's face, staring into his cab window, as he drove 40 miles per hour, except her body was crawling upside down, clinging to the metal frame like an insect. His truck swerved, crashed into a ditch, and when help arrived, he was babbling incoherently, insisting they're still out there. They followed me. Perhaps most unsettling of all is what locals say about children born near the hollow. Some are born with unusual features, too many teeth, eyes that seem to glow faintly in the dark, limbs that don't move quite right. Families quietly relocate, vanish into anonymity, as if trying to outrun something in their blood. And while officials dismiss these as exaggerations, midwives in the region whisper that the Parker curse still runs strong, hidden among unsuspecting families who carry fragments of that grotesque legacy. If the Parker line has ended, it left behind scars so deep that the land itself seems poisoned by their presence. But if it continues, if there are still descendants lurking in the woods, then the horror has only gone to ground, waiting for the right moment to rise again. That possibility is what chills even the bravest locals, the idea that every snapped branch, every shadow moving between trees, could be the Parkers watching, waiting, hungering. So ask yourself this. If you were to drive down a lonely Appalachian road tonight, and you saw a figure on the shoulder of the highway, gaunt, pale, with eyes that glint like a predator's, would you stop? Or would you press the gas, praying you never looked into the hollow that birthed the most grotesque family Appalachia has ever known? Because the Parker story is more than a legend. It is a reminder. In the endless dark of the mountains, where isolation breeds madness, and hunger twists into ritual, sometimes the monsters we fear are not born from imagination, but from us. And sometimes they never die. Asterisk, if the Parker story left you unsettled, you're not alone. Their grotesque legacy still echoes through Appalachia, and some say their bloodline continues in the shadows even now. If you were brave enough to make it this far, prove it. Hit subscribe, drop a comment with your thoughts, and tell me, would you dare step foot into Parker Hollow? And if you thought this was disturbing, just wait until you hear what I uncovered about the next Appalachian clan. That story might just keep you from ever setting foot in the mountains again.